I really just want to do the right thing. And I'm not sure if I'm not feeling like this recording is the right thing, but maybe it'll come into it. I've posted several recordings lately that I felt iffy about, but for the most part, once I post, I leave it. Though I just did like a hour and 15-minute post that I erased, lost forever. So I erased it from my phone too. And then I did about another hour recording on my phone that I erased, so I've been erasing a lot lately. Which means I'm developing a good editor because I recognize that so much of my work really is shit. Like, I do a lot of bad work in both senses of the word. I mostly record one sense, though I record a little of the other sense. And in my life, it is that other sense I live more. Alright, well, I'm wearing my Raphael cap. Um, for me, I've never been interested in geography or history until I accidented upon, or occidented upon, or was pushed upon and forced upon Raphael. And the Raphael rooms of the Vatican, I've never been into. Well, I shouldn't say never, but I've mostly never till recently been into, Catholic things. I'm not Catholic. But Raphael as an individual, so to speak, and his works have become kind of like an anchor, something I can build everything else out from. And until a few days ago, you know, I didn't know where Turkey was. I didn't know where the Arabian Peninsula was. I didn't know where Israel was. I didn't know where the Black Sea or the Red Sea or the Dead Sea or the Caspian Sea was. Now I do. Because I have that first papal apartment that Raphael painted. Writing, painting, what's the difference, right? There is and there isn't a difference. But, um, yeah, the disputation in the School of Athens. The School of Athens had some other name. I think the disputation might have as well in the beginning, but things take on new names because the story evolves. And that's one of the things about like myths and stories and the stories of the saints. The last couple days I've been digging a little, very little deeper into Saint Nicholas and Saint Jerome. And you only need to listen to maybe 3 tellings before you have 5 different stories. Like, the mythology gets convoluted. However, think of it this way too. There's a human being who does something, and all of a sudden, like, the story gets told and told again. And I remember this when I used to, believe it or not, play football, and I was reported to be okay. Um, but in retrospect, I think I was probably the worst ever. But I did all right, I guess. But anyway, um, with some of my old football buddies, you know, when we told the story. And it didn't even have to be about football, just those were a group of my friends, you know, and like when we talk about anything, something that happened at a party, something that happened in school, something that happened on the field. However, every telling of the story, it got bigger. It got bigger and bigger, right? So this is associated often with lying, right? Embellishments and so on. But then recently I've been thinking, and that has to do in some sense also with this recent study. I'll jam out in a minute. I'll try to get this football analogy out first though, but I'm going to jam out on what I was just about to jam out on in a minute. But like the embellishment, what if, you know, like what if the event is the seed? What if the event is that flame in a hot air balloon that becomes the story of the embellishment that all of a sudden inspheres an entire archetype? What if the event, the person, the place, the situation, the being, what if the beingness of the situation is instigated by the eventuality like there's the Parmenidean being, and then there's the whosoever becoming. I can't remember who, if we oppose Parmenides' being to somebody's becoming, I can't remember who. I don't know if it's Proclus or Iamblichus or even back to Heraclitus or whatever. I mean, becoming is a recurring theme. But what if that seed of beingness is instigated backwards through the becomingness that peaks at eventuality? What if, say there are remarkable folks, right? Remarkable people, remarkable avatars, remarkable spirits, remarkable souls, remarkable things, remarkable ideas, remarkable encapsulated thought forms, remarkable archetypes, remarkable events, remarkable permutations and permeations. That require that seed of fact in order to create that balloon of fiction. You know, fact and fiction, in a sense, go back to the same thing. Just as awe is both fear, well, rather, fear is both frightenedness and awe. To see something so awesome. You know, there are many ways to fear God. There are many ways to stand in awe of the highest principle. So what if the things that an individual does in their life and the way they touch or react to certain people in their life, that means something and that reverberates and that's something in the now. But then there's the next now and the next now. Or all the hypersaturated nows in eternity that require movement, that require a certain type of tempered sequentiality. Because in what are a lot of times considered atemporal modes of being, disembodied or otherwise, there is still a sequentiality. For those who have experimented with hallucinogenic drugs, right? And I've only experimented. I'm not a master, but I did enough to know that that path is more or less over for me. The possibility exists that it will open up for me again in a very limited way. I accept that as a possibility. Or also as an accident. Because there have been times when I've just been messing around in nature because I don't know what I'm doing, where I've come across something that I've later come to realize, as far as like playing with mushrooms, that I find that I don't know what they are in nature. And then having an experience and then realizing, like, oh, obviously, something happened there, like physically, chemically. But, anyway, after a very long, I wouldn't say a very long, but after a long enough series of bad trips, years back, I realized that path had been closed to me, and that perhaps I'd found what I was looking for there. Eat a mushroom and then encounter a lion and see how much truth you find there. Your last truth will be, your last truth you remember will be, and the last truth your meat will encounter before becoming lion poop will be that feline gut track, the violin of time. Yeah, that whole being versus becoming. Different types of being, different types of becoming, different types of fear, different types of awe. So to be human fully, because we talk about the fullness of the human experience. The fullness of the human experience. And in one sense, that fullness is derided and kept in a cage where it shouldn't be. But in another sense, another interpretation of that aspect is kept in a cage where it should be. And it's the whole free will thing. It's that whole hyper saturated eternal thing. It's that whole, like I said before, like the whole deal with tripping. Acids, mushrooms. What's that? Well, a friend of mine, he used to take one that used to talk about mescaline. Yeah, I never took mescaline, but he used to talk about that. So he dealt with it a lot better than I think I would have. I took acid at least once. Might have been another time, but like once I can remember. And if I did after that, I can't remember. I used to black out a lot back then. And there's a lot of things I did I can't remember. But I do remember one instance for sure because I wasn't too out of it. And I enjoyed it. It was a more or less good experience. More or less. Which is saying a lot for my experiences. But I did mushrooms quite a bit. And then I had a bad trip, and that was it. And I tried and tried and tried again, and that was it. It was over. And my last one, thank God, just said, "This ain't for you no more. You got what you had to get out of this." I wish this drug would tell me the same thing. It hasn't yet. I'm hoping soon. But all right. Yeah, that hyperset. Even those trippy times when like time wasn't the same, there was still a sequence. It was different. It was more slippery, so to speak. But there was still a certain type of sequentiality. And when I was still here. I do have kind of a belief, a faith, and a little bit of a second-hand knowledge of those who are capable of either not being here or being in two places or times at once. Enough has been demonstrated to me that such a thing is. I can't say that I've experienced that. I have questionable moments, but I can't say. So I don't know. But while here, I've been to other places. While here. And even in what might be considered, I've heard it called before and I identified with it because of the experience I had, triple black. There was still a certain sequentiality, but it was all overlapped in different types of black. And that was back, 20 years ago, about. But it was the biggest moment of my life. It was the biggest moment of my life. And once to someone who could be considered and should be considered a master. Not a master like this, but a maestro in the spiritual sense. I'll later footnote, I hope I get to it. I footnoted it before, but I'll get to my footnote on my concern about masters. But anyway. And once I've come upon masters a few times. Only recently have I acknowledged that, like in the past, I was like, did I just come upon a master? 20 years back, 15 years back, I'd come upon someone and I'd be like, they know something. Like, something's going on here, Like, they're speaking too high to what I'm on, And, and I'd be like, are they? Aren't they? Aren't they? Aren't they? And then now I realize that they definitely were. But I heard once, I reached out once because I found online. Because of the things the dude was saying, I was like, I've never heard anybody talk about this. And it spoke exactly to peculiar instances that had happened in my life. I was like, this is someone it wasn't just someone in a book. So I'd read a few books, all from people who are dead, whereas like, I thought to myself, like, I wish these guys were alive, because it was only a handful of people who spoke to things that connected with me in a way that I understood. Now, since I've grown older, I find more and more people who I can connect with in ways that I understand that relate back to those ways. But at that time, I didn't have a language for the things I've come to appreciate since. And currently, I recognize I don't have a language for things that I will come to appreciate. You know, thank you for that insight. I hope I live long enough to live up to that gift. I hope I live long enough to truly appreciate or use the gift of that insight that time has afforded via the Most High. Yeah, don't smoke. Don't smoke. Unless you have to. Anyway, I reached out to someone who I clearly recognize was in the deep and the high, right? Had a big sphere. And that's the thing about spheres too, right? They have a surface area. So, in some sense, we're all a sphere, big or small, and we have a surface, and that surface has a depth. Or maybe we're all the same size sphere with zero. We're a sphere with quote unquote infinite surface area and zero volume. Maybe that's our inception. We're a sphere which might just be a point with a radius of zero. An infinite surface area and no volume. And maybe we begin to grow upon that surface area, and we're always reaching in harmonically and exponentially in relation to the way that we're reaching out. So until we collapse or whatever, we're infinitely reaching in toward a center point, and we're infinitely reaching out toward an infinite radius where our circumference and radius create a right angle with perpendicular lines. Like, do perpendicular lines exist, or do they exist in our minds beyond a certain threshold of circularity that we can recognize? But anyway, I reached out to this dude. He was a it just so happened he was a, like, black preacher. But that's not why I reached out to him. I've listened to, hundreds of black preachers online. Hundreds of white preachers, philosophers, scientists, like whatever. Anybody and everybody. I'm just looking for answers. I'm just flipping over stones. But anyway, as soon as this guy opened his mouth, I was like, Pew! Anyway, after a couple years of listening to him, I finally got up the nerve to, like, buy a book, to put my information on the web, to make that connection, as far-flung as that was. And then after a couple months, whatever, a couple communications, I bought a couple conference calls, I was still more or less, yeah, totally out of the fray, really, but I was there, listening, sheepishly. But anyway, I finally get up the nerve one day to just reference that non-sequential triple black split space. Mentioned that it wasn't something that I read about, but that, well, I just said that wasn't something that I'd read about, and that, I can't remember how I worded it at the time, but it was, basically a god. I said it was a God-sized problem, God-sized problem. And he never responded to me in the email, but somewhere later in his videos, which made me feel like he'd seen the email, and certainly if not, he'd energetically received it, but he mentioned about how there are things we can come upon that seem like God that aren't. And to some sense, I remember I felt like he was speaking to me in particular. And I felt a little bit offended. Like, you misinterpreted what I said. I said God-sized, not God. And of course, anything that's not God can't be God-sized. But from my smallness, I was hoping you'd understand that I saw something very, very big and very small. But, I saw something with more breadth and more depth than anything I'd experienced in my life by far. The defining moment of my life. Basically passed out in the shower. And I can't remember what happened just before that. I can remember what happened like a couple days before that. I was working a couple jobs. I was working night shift. I'd been more or less up for a couple days. So I was obviously in a state. And I'd seen a friend of mine. And to my mind, there'd been a great concern that he'd been having that we'd been talking about. And I saw its resolution in my mind, clear as a bell. There were some other kind of powerful experiences that had been happening to me over that couple day period, but that was a big one, and I remembered I saw it clear as a bell, and I just couldn't wait to tell him. I couldn't wait to tell him, like, dude, this whole thing, you're fine. Don't, like, it's gonna work out great. Like, don't worry about it. As it turns out, I was right. But even in my rational mind, I didn't believe it, because it did really seem like this certain, like, bad thing was gonna happen. Like, nobody would have put money on the other thing. Anyway, I felt it really strong, and I went to see, and I ran into him at the store on my way home. It was in the morning, so I was on my way home from a night shift, and we just ran into each other at the store, and I was like, "Oh, dude, like, it's all right, everything's fine, don't worry, like, it's all gonna work out great, like beyond expectation, it's gonna be perfect." And I remember he looked at me and said, "Jeff, people are starting to think you're talking weird." And all of a sudden, that 2 days of, like, tingles and prickles and everything just went. And I beelined at home, which at the time I was living with my folks again. I was in my early 20s. I went back and forth living with them a lot. And I remember I went to the shower. And It was this domino cascade downward from the moment he said that till I got in the shower and then I dropped. It wasn't just that did it. There's a lot more I don't want to get into, but that was part of it. But, yeah, time proved that I was correct. I was more correct than I could have ever imagined. But anyway, that was God. That was God sized. What happened? It was big. And then I'm laughing. It's no laughing matter. I mean, it's the biggest thing that ever happened. And everything I've done over the last 20 years has, in some sense, been to answer that question or to run away from it. But it's always been the push and pull of that moment. Yeah. It was definitely below the threshold of time that we know, but I don't know how close to the center it was, and I did not go through the center. But man, I was right up to it. And I'm only saying this because I hope it helps you. And I hope it helps me, such that we can help each other. And again, that all has is back to do with it's like about evolution, being, becoming, the debate between being and becoming. And I'm not a teacher, I'm a student, you know, and I'm giving a book report or a topic report, so to speak, to other students. But would I like to be a teacher? Sure. But first I have to know what's worth teaching. And I have to know how to teach. I could know what's worth teaching and not know how to teach. Or I could know how to teach and not know what's worth teaching. At the time being, I know neither. So at the very least, I'll watch this again. I'll post it or I won't. So I might watch it a couple times or I might never see it again. But I have to practice. I have to get better. And if you're in my shoes, you know what I mean. And you might watch this 20 years or 200 years from now. But you might just be one day behind me spiritually, so to speak. And, okay, so say it's Say you live. Say you live 300 years ahead of me minus a day. And this is just in a way to analogize, just a thought experiment. You are 299 years, 364 days of a non-leap year ahead of time of me. Let's just say it like that. Right. You're 300 years ahead of me minus a day. And for some reason, that 300 years corresponds to each other. So the day I was born was the day before you were born 300 years from now. Get it? So that those timelines meet up minus a day. So on one day of, I might live 20 years, 2 years, 2 days, 300 years ahead of time from you, behind time from you. Were there secret societies 300 years ago who had a time travel YouTube based on crystals and copper? Don't think they didn't. Well, never mind. If you figured out how to time travel, who says that people would time travel people? Little fucking gnat would be the most efficient thing to time travel. Just saying. Or, you know, I mean, it would be much more efficient. Or maybe not even a gnat. Something the size of, like, the topmost pinky phalange. Something, or several somethings the size of the topmost pinky phalange. About that big. You could time travel a whole lot of those motherfuckers. You get a lot of info back where you is. Just saying. But that's just something to think about. But even the idea of becoming or being with animals. I was watching this thing about like a quote unquote animal whisperer woman. Awesome, man. She's the real deal. Anna something, I can't remember. I'm sure I'll reference her later because she's obviously the real deal and like taps into it, you know. And then I think, well, could I quote unquote disagree with someone, with her, or someone such as her? Like, I can't do that. You know, I've had experiences like that, but not sustainable. So certainly she is my superior in that sense, maybe every sense, and maybe by a heck of a lot. But would I have it within me to disagree with her on certain things that she says? Would there be any truth in that? And one of the things I think about a lot, because the prophets piss me off a lot, the magicians, the witches, the philosophers, the scientists, everybody. And when I'm pissed, it doesn't mean I'm right. But occasionally when I'm pissed, I might be right. Occasionally. It's bound to happen, right? Like, if I was wrong about everything, I'd probably not still be alive. But I gotta be right about something. And it has to do with the philosophy of becoming versus the philosophy of being. And when people say that we've lost our connection with nature. I mean, and we've lost our connection with animals. and it's kind of related to like the noble savage idea. But like one of the things, and that's true, and it seems like that idea is always paired up against like dominate. So it's always the like noble savage, in touch with nature, Lion King, Circle of Life, except not the Disney version, but the part where the lion eats everything that fucking moves. Like National Geographic, Kudu, um, I don't know what. Native American, buffalo soldier, hunter. I know I'm mixing up things there, but it's partially intentional. It's not a bad thing to mix up those archetypal and symbolic forms. So you have the noble, savage circle of life versus the dominate the brutal natural world. These two things in opposition. But it doesn't take into account, on the one sense, like a balanced view in between and a larger view that doesn't encapsulate that both of those, like an end that both of those don't touch, and it also doesn't encapsulate a direction spherically, not in opposition but in relation to them, touching a way of thinking about the whole thing that's not even possible within that strict opposition. So one would be is that responding to animals with our animal nature, people are eaten by wild animals. So in one sense, it's no wonder that humans have developed an adversarial relationship with nature. That's understandable. We shouldn't hate people for that shit. Nature has been very brutal and harmful to human beings. Right? But of course, we've been that way to nature also. And there are times look at the work people into two things: grains, textiles. Grains, textiles. The immense amount of work that goes into eating a grain-based diet, which gets a bad rap these days, but there's all kinds of different grains. And there's also differences between what foods we eat. I mean, like in North Korea, my understanding from a couple books I've listened to is that like they would have done anything just for a bowl of fucking rice. They're eating fucking pine bark. If they're lucky, they get some corn. If they could have just had some fucking rice, right? Or also people like harsh on potatoes, but the idea if you eat just potatoes, nothing else, just potatoes, the way the body can react to that and so on. but like grains and textiles. Weaving by hand garments. Procuring something to weave. Procuring something non-animal based to weave. Grains. A lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of using these, which we were given arguably the best of. Arguably, whether it's true or not, we've been given the best of these. So we can do more of this than anything else. I can't. I'm just moving my fingers right now. I'm not doing anything except for telling a story. But we've been given the best of these. We can do more. I can't, but I've seen videos of people weaving shit just by hand with just a little spool of string. Shit weaved out. They're using their feet. And they're just, usually women, weaving this shit, man. With patterns. Perfectly mathematical. Over, thousands by thousands. Or grains. Harvesting grains is enormous work. And sometimes, like something the size of amaranth, it's practically bigger than a grain of sand. People harvest it, refine it, harness it, process it, extract its nutrients. So much more work. So what's easier? Like, yeah, tracking an animal, this or that. So you go on a hunt. A day, a couple days, a few days, a week, a month. Then you get a hide, you get the meat. So then you get clothing, you get nutrients. Which is more advanced? Which is a greater technology? Which is more civilized? Just saying. Something to think about. I guess probably people do cast it in those terms. I don't watch much vegan stuff, so I don't know what the vegan arguments are. I kind of can't stand most of the people who talk about vegan shit. I don't know why. Because the vegans I know I like. But I don't know that many. And actually I don't know any now. I've just met some along the way. I'm the only one I know. But I don't know that many people anymore. Yeah. Grains and textiles. A lot of work. A lot of manual labor. Labor pains. But then what does that do? It frees us up. That we can begin to engender trust. I want to get to the part about I want to get to the part I want to get to about to get to. Because then it all has to do with archetypal forms, and I used to think about them one way. Now I think about them differently because of some of the work I've done. Some of my old videos that show interference patterns of primarily Archimedes spirals, though some was interference patterns of a specific manipulation of a 12-point circle that I animated. But either way, you ended up with what appear to be skeletal structures, flesh like structures, uh, flows of current in ways that appear practically architecturally, or they almost look like engineering drawings. When in some of my 12-point circle videos, they almost look like engineering drawings. And some of the Archimedes spiral interference pattern animations, they look something a bit closer to, at least um, at least metaphorically, look a little bit closer to something that might be like subatomic or archetypal, because animal forms come up a lot, insect forms and so on. Some very subtly, some rather strongly. And that's given me a whole new appreciation to the idea of archetypal forms. Um, you know, the whole idea between spirit and soul, the distinction between spirit and soul, took me years to come upon any way of thinking about that or making that separation. I've satisfied myself with that they're not the same. And that in some sense, the soul has a closer connection, even though right, the whole like mind versus matter separation, I've heard it described a million different ways, and whether you're in the camp of the mind is completely separated and different and here's the body, or they're connected or whatever, like I've never heard a description that I approve of, including my own. But if I had to come down in a camp, right, like this is the mind, or part of it, or the mind is so hypersaturated that it requires a place to enact its pattern. This is such a place. And very real in that sense. So, because there's the simulation camp, and even the simulations, like, do we live in a simulation? I've identified two, or I've distinguished two simulation camps, and they're completely opposite of each other. So sometimes when people are talking about simulation, they're talking about one thing. Sometimes when people talk about simulation, they're talking about another thing. Almost completely opposite. Yet, there's like this perfect twist tie, inverse opposition, like, you know, this arm is not this arm, but yet the left side is not the right side. So, but like some sides of the simulation is like, are we living in something that's some like, they're thinking of us inside of a computer, more or less. I mean, that's the analogy. They're thinking like that there's some physical object specifically built by beings kind of like us, but greater, and that they built something as a technology the way we build technology, and like we're in that thing, and that's the simulation. The other sense of simulation is that, and that's a very crude way of thinking about it. And the opposite very crude way of thinking about it is there is one singularity. There's a master singularity. All singularities exist within, this collective singularity, which is one point, one mind, that all minds live inside of, and everything that we experience is just a projection, a holographic, hypersaturated projection of that stacked point. So in one sense, you're getting like this technological apparatus that is so constructed to construct the emergent property of what seems like consciousness and what seems like separate beings in the machine. Versus an atemporal, aspatial pattern projecting a holograph of existence that isn't happening, that we experience as happening. So to my mind, those are the two oppositions of simulation. But both of those, in some sense, are beingness and don't necessarily speak to the fullness of becomingness. Why is, I never liked that distinction. I don't like it when people talk about being. I don't like it when people talk about becoming. All of it's like too much power or too much zen or like for me. And that just might be my shortcoming. But I got to be honest about it if I'm going to learn anything. Free will, like that's the thing that comes in, is the necessity of free will, and not just like the necessity as far as like it's built into the pattern. Like the necessity of free will is built into the pattern. It's part of the pattern because so much is happening at every instant. And it's so perfectly configured that time is required. Movement is required in order for the pattern to express itself. But the pattern is so hypersaturated that as soon as the pattern is expressed in movement in any way whatsoever, which is required by the way in which it's hypersaturated, and for lack of a better analogy, like the electromagnetic way that it's configured, it is configured that it requires movement. As soon as movement is made, time is required, is necessary, is posited, is enacted, is expressed, is. However, even in that expression of movement and in that necessitation of time, the pattern is still so hypersaturated that it can't just move mechanically. Like, that's when choice becomes required. A lot like static electricity. Step levers. for better or worse, a choice must be made. Choices have been made. So we're always on this specific path, but that specific path is always step leader. So it really can bend and swirl miraculously if that step leader makes enough connections. And these neural microtubule discharges, thunderstorms. So the whole idea of like becoming and evolution and teleology and entelechy, theurgy, teleurgy, theology, philosophy, da 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 da. We have to choose to do the right thing. Choices will be made, and we will make choices. But, and a lot of it is quite abstract, and especially as we first come into it. I know there are masters among us, and I know there are more people than most people would think. There are more masters among us than most of us could even begin to imagine. But they're not free, they're here with us. All these saints, all these avatars, all these disciples and apostles and ascended masters, they're fucking right here, man. They're still here. And all our ancestors, and a lot of people get big on praying to the ancestors and what the ancestors give us. And that's what makes the distinction between. There are many mystical things we can experience. There are many altered states of reality we can experience. We can tap into the ancestors. We can have the experience. We can have a mystical experience of tapping into the ancestors. That mystical experience may or may not be tapping into the ancestors. There can be two different types of mystical experiences that appear to tap into the ancestors. One could and one could not. Now, for that matter, there's four. Because there are ancestors that ought to be tapped. There are ancestors we should tap into. And there are ancestors we should not tap into because they were wrong. Still mystical, still magical. In one way, we could tap into the ancestors that we should tap into the right way. And when we're tapping into that, it's good. We can have a false experience through some intermediary that gives us the impression we're tapping into the ancestors we should tap into. But we're not. It's just so far beyond our understanding that we've been tapped into, we've been hacked by a thought form, by an interference pattern, by a software of a shape of, for lack of better terminology, an electromagnetic force that has shape. Just like cymatics have shape, we look at all that cymatic stuff with the sand on the plates. Things can exist like that, energetically, in 3 dimensions, not just 2. We just haven't necessarily come up with the best ways to represent it in 3 dimensions. It would be some sort of bubble. And we could represent these shapes. But even if they're synthetic, it's like a CGI. When we make CGI forms, they're representing something that happens. Same thing with cymatics. It's an analogy of what's out there, energetic, electromagnetically. Never mind dark energy and dark matter, all that mycelial network of shit we totally don't understand that's running through us. We're, we're suspended in this big web. We're in the spider web of dark matter and dark energy that operates in different inversions. Things we don't understand that's running right through us. Never mind the things we do understand as the X-rays are running through us. X-ray lasers shooting away from far off astrological objects, astronomical objects. Never mind all the different ideas of all the weird shit that's out there, depending on what branch of non-classical physics you're akin to, or what truly, like, one of the things people don't talk about is like a new classicism, a more refined and even finer pointed classicism. Because people use all the computers and all that shit to find out about the quantum this and this and that and this and that and the non-classical, beyond the classical. But if we use all the computer and all that knowledge to say, whoa, let's look at a bigger, more complex geometry that's fucking more classical, and blows all this shit out of the water. Just saying, don't hear about it. You know, I'm just a house painter, but something's going on. Something's going. I'm just saying, not because of me. Doesn't have to. It's just for some reason I got a job flipping over rocks, and that job comes from on high. You know, I didn't hear the call. I didn't answer no call. But, right, many, what is it, many are called. Few can't answer the call. I won't call. I didn't answer the call. I'm that other guy, you know. And it ain't all peaches and cream, you know. Just saying. You know, not saying it's gonna work out, but I'm hoping that even in my failure, it will help what needs to be helped. The hypersaturation necessitates the movement. The movement still hypersaturated, not even just supersaturated, hypersaturated, necessitates choice. Choice necessitates free will. Free will. It's funny. Choice is we must choose. Choice is mandatory. Every moment we must choose. Choice is mandatory. Whether we choose well or we choose poorly, an end will come. But the end is not necessitated by choice. The end is necessary, or an end, not like the end, not like there's only one choice of end. End. There are many choices of end. They're harmonic. Kind of. But that there be an end, or a threshold, or a node, a place where waves, an interference pattern, where things meet, like an end, is necessary. And free will determines that end. Why is it will? Because collectively, our choices matter. And our choices interact with each other. And your choices have affected me. And my choice right now is affecting you. Certainly, if you've made it this far, in some way you've been affected. You might be completely offended and aghast at everything I've said. And that's some sort of interaction between our free wills, and that will have an effect. The effect I'm hoping it's going to have, if you've made it this far, is that either you'll choose not to eat animals, or you'll at least get one little brick on the wall of your resolve to fight for that effort in a way that actually is going to make a difference. Because you can be militant about it all you want, you can yell at people and preach to people all you want, but if it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't matter. Like, this is a war to be won. It's not a war game. And trust me when I tell you, I'm reminding myself right now, and I think that might have been the whole point of this entire video, was to remind myself that, like, game theory is not a game. Right? Like, we're in a war, and there will be an end that is collapsed upon, and it will be collective. Our individual ends matter, and our collective end matters. It all matters very much. And that end will come. But the way in which it comes matters. And we have the opportunity to come to a greater or lesser end. They'll be more or less the same shape. But, you know, if we have a small come to, we'll call it a come to. If we have a small come to, there will be a big blast. And we'll reach out on the other side with an even smaller come to. But if we push morally, not just ethically, morally, and the biggest moral thing we can do, because people talk about the oil and this or that, we could get all the quote-unquote environmental shit, we could get all the science that everybody's concerned about right now, we could get that all right, and if we're still fucking eating burgers, another fucking comet's gonna motherfucking come down, the floods are gonna come, the earth is gonna rumble, I mean, because it's all connected. All that microbiota, all the archetypes, everything, all that web of dark matter and dark energy is going right through our fucking gut, to every little neural fucking synapse and every little thing and every little bacteria, and never mind all the other microorganisms that live in us. It ain't just bacteria, it ain't just single-celled shit. That's all over us. All that energy. You know, you relate to a dog different than you relate to a cat, different than you relate to a snake, to a frog, to a bird, but not all birds are the same. Not all chipmunks are the same. One came up to me today. Most don't. So then there are special cases, right? But And that's the same with our microbiome. There are two people standing right next to each other, and they have a cajillion different species living in them. They're practically not the same thing at all, but they're both human, even though most cells in the human body aren't human. Other species. And they could be totally different. And that's the whole thing with like probiotics too, is that, and everybody's all about the lactose shit, and there's a gazillion different lactose, and then there's shit that got nothing to do with lactose. So, all that stuff's super important, but then when you take it on a quantum or hyper classical level, then all of a sudden you're talking about something totally different. And it's the difference between the electromagnet I made the other day and a Tesla car. Or the dude. But and when we stop eating animals, a lot of animals will die. A lot of predatory animals will die. There's gonna be a mass kill. We're on the horizon of the collapse of this choice that we're making. And if we don't stop at a massive level, it's got to be big. In my mind, I'm thinking like, oh, it's going to be 100% in 5 years. I'm very optimistic. Too optimistic, probably, but maybe not, man. Got to believe in miracles. Have to. And miracles is just reason that we haven't come to yet. Reason we don't understand. Things happening on a much higher level. But like, if we don't stop eating animals like yesterday, the way that reverberates through space-time is going to be very, 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 very bad. Entangled particles. They can do it in a lab, in a laboratory. They can entangle particles, electrons, whatever. They can make one particle be in two places at the same time, or so they say, in all the ways they can identify a particle. Right? Are there ways that a particle can't be identified? Yes. So in that sense, it could be two different particles. We just think they're the same because all of the parameters that we use to measure what a particle is are satisfied in the condition of that experiment. That's also a possibility. But then there are the stories of those who can be in two places at the same time. Mystical shit. And I've encountered those who have been very persuasive in that respect. You might be like, who the fuck are you? You're saying you met these people, you done this, you done that? Exactly. I'm just as dumbfounded as you are. I'm a drunk, But then today I was listening to some shit about St. Jerome. He was a party dude. Thomas Jefferson was a party dude. A lot of people hating on him, even though he was Underground Railroad. I think most of the shit he wrote about was just I think it was just a story that some super smart fucking enlightened dude, like enlightened in that fucking Hindu sense, wrote to give us something to think about. But to my mind, he was definitely part of the Underground Railroad, and it was all just like a front, a show to make shit happen so we could be where we are today to make the right choice. Anyway, Can't remember who I was talking about just before that. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Just trailed off, and that's it. Hope I spoke to something. Someday I want to lay shit out nice and smooth. Proof of the prophets. The Raphael prophecy, man. Turkey, Turkey. Queen Anne's Lace, World War II. Lone Ranger, Dorothy. Tonto, Toto. Silver Slippers. Hi-Ho Silver. Indigo. Go to India. Go begly tepi. Go beg Lee. Take out the G. Go belly. Take out the G and the E. Go bill teepee. Gobble teepee. Turkey. Thanksgiving. The name for Turkey, in the country Turkey. Hindi, Indian, guinea fowl. I'm working on it. Every day I work on it a little, but I gotta gather all the information. Like, it's really easy to just like Google shit real fast and just be like, Q, 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 Q. But then to actually put it in a way you can explain it to people, that's a whole nother story. But I'll try to get there, because it is the best story ever, and it's a proof of prophecy from 500 years ago, and it's the 500th exactly anniversary of Raphael's death, and the Raphael Papal Apartments, like it or not, like Christianity or not. I'm not even saying Raphael was really Raphael. I'm saying he was Rapunzel. I'm saying he was Saint Agnes. I'm saying that dude go back way before Council Nicaea, wherever the fuck he was, man. Wherever and whenever he came from. And it might have been in the future going back, but I hope I live long enough to tell the greatest story not been told. And sometimes I picture myself being like, giving a speech and having being like, yes, I admit it. But that's not what keeps me going. What keeps me going is no one's told it. And they could make a difference. Because it's proof. It's proof like nothing else I've ever seen. And I've seen some crazy shit. And some pretty hardcore fucking proof, man. It's circumstantial evidence, but it's overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Overwhelming. Overwhelming. Way beyond a reasonable doubt. So. Really hope you're having an awesome day. Or a good enough day. And if you're having a bad day, I hope you get through it. If you're having a really bad day, get through it. If you're having a really, really bad day, just get through the day. If you're having a crappy day, I can relate. Maybe you need a laugh, or maybe you need a nap, or just to go to bed. Or maybe you need to stay up, work on something. I don't know what you need, but I hope you find it.